They told you the story, but they didn't tell you the truth. Every mystery leaves a record. Find it here.
The wind hit the flames like gasoline. Within seconds, the fire leapt from one wooden building to the next, roofs igniting, windows exploding, people screaming in the streets. In the darkness of an October night in Chicago, the sky turned blood red, and no one knew how it started. Some said a lantern was kicked over by a cow. Others believed something far more sinister had happened that night. But by the time the truth began to surface, an entire city was already burning. October 8th, 1871. At around 9 p.m., a small flame appeared inside a barn behind a modest home owned by Catherine O'Leary and her husband Patrick O'Leary. At first, it looked ordinary. Barn fires weren't unusual in a city built almost entirely from wood. Wooden houses, wooden sidewalks, wooden barns. Even many of the roads were lined with timber structures. But this fire was different. Within minutes, neighbors noticed something terrifying. The flames weren't just rising, they were racing. The wind that night was unusually strong, pushing the fire east toward the heart of Chicago. Sparks shot through the air like glowing arrows, landing on rooftops blocks away. Suddenly, new fires erupted everywhere. And the city's firefighters had already made a deadly mistake. Earlier that same evening, crews had responded to another large blaze across town. Exhausted and short-staffed, they were slow to react when the alarm for the O'Leary barn was raised. Even worse, there was confusion at the fire alarm system. The signal sent to the fire department pointed to the wrong location. By the time firefighters realized their mistake, the flames had already grown into an unstoppable wall of fire. But here's the question that still haunts historians today. Was this disaster really an accident? Or did something, or someone, turn a small barn fire into one of the most devastating infernos in American history? Chicago in 1871 was a city growing faster than almost anywhere in the United States. Railroads crisscrossed the city. Lumber yards stacked millions of feet of dry timber along the river. Immigrants poured into crowded neighborhoods searching for work and opportunity. It was a booming city. But it was also a city built like a tinderbox. Weeks before the fire, Chicago had suffered a brutal drought. Not a single drop of rain had fallen for nearly a month. Wooden buildings had dried out like paper. Even the sidewalks could burn. And the wind that night? Nearly 30 miles per hour. Perfect conditions for disaster. But the real nightmare began when the fire reached the Chicago River. Most people believed the river would stop it. Fire couldn't cross water. Except this time, it did. Burning debris carried by the wind landed on the opposite side of the river, igniting warehouses filled with coal and lumber. Suddenly, the flames jumped into the downtown district. The city's wealthiest neighborhoods were next. Hotels, theaters, churches, banks, entire blocks began collapsing into the inferno. Panic spread through the streets. Families grabbed whatever they could carry. Wagons overloaded with furniture clogged the roads. People ran toward the lake, hoping the water would save them. Behind them, a monstrous firestorm followed. Witnesses described tornado-like whirlwinds made entirely of flames, twisting columns of fire that lifted burning debris hundreds of feet into the air. Roofs were ripped off buildings, glass melted, iron rails bent from the heat. And then the fire reached one of the city's most important landmarks, the Chicago courthouse. Inside were critical city records, legal documents, and property deeds. Within minutes, the building collapsed in flames. Chicago was losing not only its buildings, but its history. By midnight, the entire city seemed to be burning, People fled east toward the cold waters of Lake Michigan, wading into the lake to escape the heat. Some stood in the freezing water for hours, watching their city disappear behind a wall of fire. Cried, parents prayed, and no one knew when it would end. The flames burned through the night and into the next day. Block after block vanished. Neighborhood after neighborhood turned into smoking ruins. By the time the fire finally died out on October 10th, the scale of destruction was almost impossible to comprehend. More than 17,000 buildings were destroyed. Around 100,000 people, 1/3 of Chicago's population, were suddenly homeless. Nearly 300 lives were lost. 3 square miles of the city were gone. But even as the ashes cooled, a question began to spread across the country. Who was responsible? Almost immediately, rumors began circulating about Catherine O'Leary. According to one popular story, she had been milking her cow when the animal kicked over a lantern, igniting the hay inside the barn. The story spread like wildfire through newspapers. It was simple, it was dramatic, and it gave the nation someone to blame. But there was just one problem. Years later, the reporter who originally wrote the story admitted something shocking. He made it up. The cow never kicked over a lantern. The story was fabricated to create a sensational headline. So if the famous cow story was false, then how did the fire really start? Some theories suggested gamblers had been drinking inside the barn and accidentally knocked over a lantern. Others believed a neighbor may have been smoking inside. And one theory, far stranger, claimed a meteor shower that night might have ignited fires across the Midwest. In fact, massive fires erupted on the exact same night in other regions, including the deadly Peshtigo fire in Wisconsin, which killed over 1,000 people. Was it coincidence? Larger, that history never fully explained. Despite the devastation, something remarkable happened next. Chicago refused to die. Within days, people began rebuilding. Architects redesigned the city with stronger materials, brick, steel, and stone, replacing the dangerous wooden structures. Engineers developed new firefighting systems, and over the next few decades, Chicago transformed into one of the most modern cities in the world. From the ashes of disaster rose skyscrapers, industry, and a new skyline that would redefine American architecture. But even today, more than 150 years later, one mystery remains unsolved. On that windy October night in 1871, what really started the fire? Was it a simple accident in a small barn? A careless mistake? Or a story that history never fully uncovered? Because sometimes the most famous explanation is the one that hides the real truth.
Love mystery and true crime? Subscribe and turn on the bell. Comment your theory below.